Most people think intelligence reveals itself when someone is speaking. Psychology suggests the opposite. Some of the strongest signs of a highly intelligent mind appear when nobody is watching, when there is no audience, no applause, and no reason to impress anyone. In this video, we're going to explore 3 private habits that psychology repeatedly links to exceptional intelligence. These behaviors often look ordinary from the outside, but they reveal something profound about how certain minds process information, solve problems, and understand the world. Watch until the end, because the third habit is the one most people completely misunderstand. In fact, many highly intelligent people spend years believing it's a weakness, when research suggests it may be one of the clearest signs that their mind operates differently from the vast majority of people. And what's fascinating is that research increasingly suggests that people who regularly put their thoughts into words don't just understand their emotions better, they often understand their decisions better, too. Because writing forces clarity. A thought can feel convincing inside your head, but the moment you try to write it down, you often discover gaps, contradictions, and assumptions you never noticed before. This is why some of the most intelligent people throughout history kept notebooks, journals, private letters, or collections of observations that were never intended for public view. They weren't writing for an audience. They were writing to think. And there's something revealing about that. The average person uses writing to communicate ideas. The reflective person uses writing to discover them. When no one is watching, they sit with a blank page and slowly transform confusion into understanding. Not because anyone asked them to, because their mind naturally seeks order. And that brings us to another behavior that often appears in highly intelligent people when they're alone. They spend time questioning things most people simply accept. Think about it. Most of the beliefs people hold were inherited. Ideas about success, ideas about relationships, ideas about happiness, ideas about what a good life should look like. Many people adopt these assumptions without ever examining them, but certain individuals cannot help themselves. They ask questions. Why do I believe this? Is this actually true? Would I still think this way if I had been born somewhere else? What evidence supports this idea? What evidence challenges it? Psychologists refer to this tendency as reflective skepticism, not cynicism, not negativity, a willingness to examine assumptions before accepting them as truth. And this habit often happens in private. Nobody sees it. Nobody applauds it. There are no rewards for spending an hour questioning an opinion you already hold. Yet intelligent minds do it anyway, because they are more interested in truth than comfort. And truth often requires uncertainty. The ability to sit with uncertainty is itself a rare psychological strength. Most people rush toward answers. Intelligent people often spend more time with questions, not because they are indecisive, because they understand something important. The quality of your answers depends on the quality of your questions. And sometimes a powerful question changes your life more than a quick answer ever could. This leads to another quiet habit. They imagine possibilities, not fantasies, possibilities, future scenarios. Alternative outcomes. Different paths. Psychologists sometimes call this mental simulation, the brain's ability to rehearse events before they happen. Highly intelligent individuals often engage in this naturally. They run situations through their minds. If I make this decision, what happens next? If this plan fails, what's my backup strategy? If this opportunity appears, how will I respond? From the outside, it can look like daydreaming. But internally, something very different is happening. The mind is building models, testing outcomes, preparing for uncertainty. Research suggests this capacity plays a significant role in decision-making and long-term planning, because reality rarely surprises a person who has already explored multiple possibilities in advance. And perhaps that's one reason intelligent people often appear calm during situations that overwhelm others. Their minds have visited similar scenarios before, not in reality, but in imagination, long before anyone else recognized the need. There's also another private behavior that deserves attention. They enjoy learning things nobody asked them to learn. Think about how unusual that is. Most learning is connected to necessity. A school assignment, a work project, an exam, a deadline. But highly intelligent people often pursue knowledge with no practical reward attached. They spend hours researching topics that may never help them professionally. History, psychology, astronomy, philosophy, human behavior, ancient civilizations, languages, not because they need the information, because curiosity itself is rewarding. Psychologists describe curiosity as one of the strongest predictors of lifelong intellectual growth, because intelligence isn't just what you know, it's how strongly you desire to know more. And when nobody is watching, curiosity becomes visible. The person opens another article, reads another chapter, watches another lecture, follows another question deeper into the unknown. Not for recognition, not for status, simply because understanding something feels meaningful. And perhaps that's one of the most overlooked signs of intelligence, the willingness to remain a student long after everyone else believes they already know enough. Because truly intelligent people understand a paradox that many never discover. The more you learn, the more you realize how much remains unknown. And instead of discouraging them, that realization inspires them. It makes the world feel larger, more fascinating, more mysterious, more worthy of exploration. While others seek certainty, they seek understanding. And that search often happens in complete silence, behind closed doors, away from crowds, away from praise, away from attention. Because some of the strongest signs of intelligence don't appear when a person is speaking. They appear when a person is alone with their own mind. And what they choose to do in those moments reveals far more than any IQ score ever could. And there is another pattern that psychologists frequently notice in people with unusually high levels of intelligence. They do not use their alone time merely to escape the world. They use it to recalibrate themselves for it. Most people move from one day to the next without stopping long enough to ask whether their actions still align with their goals. They stay busy. They stay occupied. They stay distracted. But intelligent people often have moments where they intentionally step back and examine the direction of their lives. Not just what they are doing, why they are doing it. They question routines that have become automatic. They question goals that no longer feel meaningful. They question expectations they inherited from other people, without ever consciously choosing them. This process can look strange from the outside. A person turns down invitations, spends an evening alone, goes quiet for a few days, appears distant. But internally, something important is happening. They are auditing their own life. And that ability to pause and reassess is one of the strongest predictors of long-term growth. Because intelligence is not simply the ability to solve problems. It is the ability to recognize when you are solving the wrong problem entirely. Many people climb a ladder for years only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. Reflective people are more likely to catch that mistake early, not because they are smarter in every area, because they regularly create space to think. And thinking requires distance. You cannot evaluate your life clearly when you are constantly running from one distraction to the next. Another interesting habit appears when these individuals are completely alone. They often revisit ideas repeatedly, not because they are obsessed, not because they cannot let things go, because their brains naturally seek deeper understanding. Most people are satisfied with the first explanation that sounds reasonable. Highly intelligent people tend to keep digging. They ask, what caused the cause? And then, what caused that? They follow chains of reasoning further than most people are willing to go. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as a high need for cognition, a personality trait associated with enjoying effortful thinking. People high in this trait do not view thinking as work. They view it as stimulation. A difficult question energizes them. A complicated problem attracts them. An unanswered mystery stays in their mind long after everyone else has forgotten about it. This is why some of their greatest insights arrive unexpectedly. Not during work, not during meetings, not when they are actively searching, but while sitting alone, walking quietly, looking out of a window, lying awake at night. The conscious mind relaxes, the deeper processing continues, and suddenly a connection appears. An answer surfaces. A pattern becomes obvious. What looks like intuition is often the result of thousands of unnoticed mental calculations happening beneath awareness. The mind was working the entire time. You simply could not see it. And perhaps the most revealing habit of all is this. When highly intelligent people are alone, they are often perfectly comfortable without constant stimulation. That does not mean they enjoy boredom. It means they are rarely bored for long, because they carry an entire world inside their minds. A single idea can occupy them for hours. A question can lead them down dozens of intellectual paths. A memory can trigger a completely new understanding of something they thought they already knew. While many people need entertainment every moment to stay engaged, intelligent minds frequently generate their own engagement. Their attention turns inward. Their curiosity activates. Their imagination takes over. And suddenly, an empty room is no longer empty. It becomes a laboratory, a classroom, a workshop, a place where ideas are tested, refined, and expanded. This is why solitude affects different people in different ways. For some, silence feels uncomfortable because it forces them to confront thoughts they have been avoiding. For others, silence feels valuable because it gives those thoughts room to breathe. And the difference is significant. Because the quality of your relationship with yourself often determines the quality of your relationship with everything else. When you can sit alone without needing to escape your own mind, you develop something increasingly rare in today's world. Mental independence. The ability to think for yourself, to evaluate ideas for yourself, to know yourself without requiring constant validation from other people. And that may be one of the strongest indicators of intelligence that psychology has ever identified. Not how much information you can memorize, not how quickly you can answer questions, but what happens when there is no audience, no noise, no distractions, and no one else in the room except you and your own thoughts. Because for certain people, that is where their most important thinking begins. There's another behavior that rarely gets talked about because, on the surface, it doesn't look impressive at all. Highly intelligent people often spend a surprising amount of time doing absolutely nothing. At least that's what it looks like to everyone else. They're staring out of a window, sitting quietly on a park bench, looking at the ceiling before falling asleep, driving without music, standing in the shower longer than necessary. From the outside, it appears unproductive, but neuroscience suggests something very different is happening. When the brain is not focused on an immediate task, a network called the default mode network becomes highly active. This network is associated with self-reflection, memory integration, future planning, and creative insight. In simple terms, some of your brain's most important work happens when it looks like nothing is happening at all. Highly intelligent individuals often give themselves access to this state more frequently than others. Not intentionally. Naturally, their minds wander toward ideas, patterns, possibilities, and questions. And while everyone else is rushing to eliminate every empty moment, they are quietly benefiting from them. This also explains why many intelligent people have a complicated relationship with boredom. They dislike external boredom, but they rarely experience internal boredom. Give them enough silence, and their minds generate their own stimulation. A random observation becomes a theory. A theory becomes a question. A question becomes an investigation, and before they know it, they've spent an hour exploring an idea nobody else in the room even noticed. What makes this especially interesting is that psychologists have found that intelligence is often less about possessing information and more about maintaining curiosity. Children ask endless questions because they are curious. Most adults stop. Highly intelligent adults often never fully lose that instinct. They continue asking questions long after other people have accepted easy answers. Why do people behave this way? Why does this pattern keep repeating? What am I missing here? What would happen if the opposite were true? Their curiosity survives adulthood. And when they're alone, that curiosity becomes even stronger because there are no social expectations limiting where their minds can go. They can explore strange ideas, unpopular ideas, incomplete ideas, ideas that would sound ridiculous if spoken aloud too early. Many breakthroughs begin this way, not as polished conclusions, but as private thoughts that were given enough time to grow. And that leads to another hidden habit. Highly intelligent people often enjoy changing their minds. Now, that sounds strange because most people view changing your mind as weakness, as inconsistency, as proof that you were wrong. But intelligent people frequently see it differently. For them, changing a belief can feel like progress. It means they've learned something. It means their understanding became more accurate. When they're alone, they revisit old assumptions, old opinions, old conclusions, and sometimes they deliberately challenge them, not because they enjoy uncertainty, because they value truth more than ego. This is difficult. The human mind naturally wants certainty. It wants stability. It wants to believe that what it already knows is correct. But intellectual growth often requires the opposite. It requires letting go of ideas that no longer fit reality. And that process usually happens in private. Nobody sees the internal debate. Nobody witnesses the old belief being dismantled. Nobody applauds the humility it takes to admit that your previous understanding was incomplete. Yet this invisible process may be one of the strongest indicators of genuine intelligence. Because a powerful mind is not one that never changes. It's one that keeps evolving. And perhaps that is why solitude matters so much. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, and distractions, it's difficult to hear your own thinking clearly. But when you're alone, something changes. The outside world becomes quieter, and the inner world becomes louder. You begin noticing thoughts you normally ignore, questions you normally avoid, insights that get buried beneath daily activity. For some people, this feels uncomfortable. For others, it feels like coming home, because deep down, they understand something many people never discover. The relationship you have with your own mind determines the quality of almost every other part of your life. The decisions you make, the goals you pursue, the people you trust, the future you create. All of it begins with thought. And thought grows strongest when it has space. So if you find yourself taking long walks with no destination, reflecting on your life, organizing your thoughts on paper, questioning assumptions, exploring ideas for hours, sitting comfortably in silence, or simply enjoying your own company more than most people seem to understand, don't dismiss those habits as strange. Psychology increasingly suggests that these quiet behaviors may reveal something important, not just about your personality, but about the way your mind processes the world. Because some of the clearest signs of intelligence don't appear when people are performing for an audience. They appear when nobody is watching, when nobody is listening, when there is nothing to gain, and a person chooses to think anyway. And there is one final pattern that appears again and again in people whose intelligence operates differently from the norm. When they are alone, they don't just think about what happened. They think about what it means. Most people experience events. Highly intelligent people often analyze the significance behind those events. A conversation is not just a conversation. It's information about human nature. A mistake is not just a mistake. It's feedback. A disappointment is not simply bad luck. It's data. This tendency can make life feel heavier at times. Because when your brain is constantly searching for meaning, very few experiences remain simple. You notice patterns where others notice incidents. You notice causes where others notice outcomes. You notice lessons where others notice inconvenience. And while that depth can sometimes feel exhausting, it is also one of the reasons intelligent people continue growing long after others stop. Because growth begins the moment experience becomes insight, and insight requires reflection. This is why many intelligent individuals have an unusual relationship with failure. When something goes wrong, they often disappear for a while. Not to avoid reality, to understand it. They replay events, examine decisions, identify blind spots, search for the exact point where things started moving in the wrong direction. To outsiders, this can look like overthinking, but often it's actually learning. The difference is important. Overthinking circles endlessly without reaching a conclusion. Learning extracts information and moves forward stronger. Highly intelligent people are not immune to mistakes. Far from it. They simply have a habit of turning mistakes into teachers, and they usually do that work alone. Nobody sees the hours of reflection. Nobody sees the internal adjustments. Nobody sees the quiet rebuilding process. They only see the improved version that emerges afterward. What makes this especially fascinating is that intelligence is often mistaken for certainty. But in reality, many highly intelligent people spend much of their lives questioning themselves. Not because they lack confidence, because they understand complexity. The more you understand a subject, the more exceptions you discover, the more perspectives you encounter, the more variables you notice, the more difficult absolute certainty becomes. This creates a paradox. The people who know the most are often the ones most aware of what they don't know. And when they're alone, they regularly confront those limits. They challenge their own assumptions, question their own conclusions, and look for weaknesses in their own thinking. Not because they enjoy self-criticism, because accuracy matters more to them than being right. That habit alone separates exceptional thinkers from ordinary ones. Most people defend their beliefs. Intelligent people investigate them. And investigation requires honesty. The kind of honesty that only exists when no one else is around. No audience, no reputation to protect, no need to win an argument. Just a person sitting alone with their thoughts, asking difficult questions. Questions like, what if I'm wrong? What am I not seeing? What assumption am I making without realizing it? Those questions rarely produce immediate comfort. But they often produce wisdom. And wisdom is something entirely different from intelligence. Intelligence helps you understand the world. Wisdom helps you understand yourself within it. The two are related, but they are not the same. And solitude is often where intelligence slowly transforms into wisdom. Because when you spend enough time alone, you eventually stop learning only about ideas. You start learning about your own mind. You discover your patterns, your fears, your strengths, your blind spots, the stories you tell yourself, the habits that help you, the habits that hurt you. And that level of self-awareness becomes a tremendous advantage, not because it makes life easier, because it makes life clearer. You stop chasing things that were never meant for you. You stop measuring yourself by standards that don't matter. You stop seeking validation from people who do not understand your values. And gradually, your decisions become more aligned with who you truly are. This is why solitude has always played such an important role in the lives of philosophers, scientists, inventors, writers, and thinkers throughout history. Not because they hated people, not because they wanted isolation, because some forms of understanding require silence. Some insights cannot compete with constant noise. Some truths only appear when the world becomes quiet enough for you to hear them. And perhaps that is the real lesson hidden beneath all of these behaviors. Taking long walks, reflecting deeply, journaling, questioning assumptions, exploring ideas, sitting comfortably in silence, searching for meaning, learning from failure. None of these habits look extraordinary from the outside. In fact, most of them look completely ordinary. That is what makes them so easy to overlook. But psychology repeatedly shows that the most important mental processes are often invisible. They happen beneath the surface, away from attention, away from applause, away from the need to impress anyone. And that is exactly why they matter. Because the truest signs of intelligence rarely appear when people are trying to look intelligent. They appear when nobody is watching, when a person is completely alone. And instead of escaping their own mind, they choose to explore it. And if you look closely, there is another behavior that appears so often among highly intelligent people that psychologists sometimes consider it a hidden form of self-education. When they are alone, they voluntarily seek discomfort, not physical discomfort, mental discomfort. They read things that challenge their beliefs. They explore perspectives they disagree with. They ask questions that do not have easy answers. Most people naturally gravitate toward information that confirms what they already think. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. It is one of the strongest tendencies in human cognition. The brain enjoys certainty. It enjoys being correct. It enjoys hearing its own conclusions repeated back to it. But highly intelligent people often do something different. They become curious about the possibility that they might be wrong. Not because they enjoy uncertainty, because they understand that growth lives on the other side of it. So while others spend their time reinforcing existing beliefs, they spend their time testing them. And that creates an enormous advantage over years and decades, because every belief that survives serious examination becomes stronger, and every belief that fails examination gets replaced by something more accurate. That process is uncomfortable. It requires humility. It requires patience. And most importantly, it requires solitude. Because questioning your own assumptions is difficult enough without the pressure of other people's opinions. Another fascinating pattern is that intelligent people often spend time imagining alternative futures, not fantasy, not escapism, mental simulation. Researchers studying decision-making have found that high-level thinkers frequently run future scenarios inside their minds. If I make this choice, where does it lead? If I continue this habit for 5 years, what happens? If this relationship continues in its current direction, what is the likely outcome? Their brains naturally create models of the future, and then test those models repeatedly. This is one reason they sometimes appear unusually prepared when challenges arise. To everyone else, the situation seems unexpected. To them, it feels familiar. Not because they predicted the future perfectly, because they rehearsed multiple possibilities long before they happened. The mind had already visited that territory, and when reality finally arrived, they recognized the landscape. This ability often develops quietly in solitude. Nobody sees it. Nobody rewards it. Nobody even knows it is happening. Yet it influences countless decisions. It changes how people manage risk, how they choose relationships, how they approach careers, how they solve problems, and over time, small advantages compound into significant differences. There is also something else highly intelligent people tend to do when they are alone. They become fascinated by questions that have no immediate practical value. Questions like, why do people seek approval? Why does power change behavior? Why do some memories stay vivid for decades while others disappear? Why are humans so afraid of uncertainty? Most people are too busy dealing with daily responsibilities to spend much time exploring these ideas. And there is nothing wrong with that. But highly intelligent minds often feel drawn toward understanding reality itself, not just surviving within it. Their curiosity extends beyond immediate usefulness. They want to understand systems, patterns, principles, the invisible forces shaping human behavior. This is why they may spend hours reading about psychology, philosophy, history, neuroscience, or subjects completely unrelated to their profession. The goal is not always practical gain. Sometimes the goal is understanding, and understanding itself becomes rewarding. In fact, psychologists have repeatedly found that one of the strongest characteristics associated with intelligence is intrinsic motivation, learning for its own sake. exploring for its own sake, thinking for its own sake, without rewards, without recognition, without external pressure. The activity itself becomes the reward, and perhaps that is why solitude feels different for these individuals. Because when they are alone, they are not actually alone. They are surrounded by questions, ideas, possibilities, memories, observations, connections. Their minds remain active companions. A quiet room becomes a place of discovery. A long drive becomes a period of reflection. A silent evening becomes an opportunity for insight. And over time, these private moments begin shaping the person they become. Because every hour spent understanding yourself improves your decisions. Every hour spent questioning assumptions improves your judgment. Every hour spent thinking deeply improves your perspective. The world often celebrates visible achievements. The promotion, the award, the success story. But those outcomes are usually built upon thousands of invisible moments that happened long before anyone noticed. Moments spent alone. Thinking, reflecting, learning, questioning, growing. And that may be the greatest irony of all. The habits that reveal exceptional intelligence are often the least impressive to watch. There are no crowds, no applause, no recognition, just a person sitting quietly with their own thoughts. Yet inside that silence, some of the most important mental work a human being can do is taking place. Because intelligence is not merely the ability to answer questions. It is the willingness to keep asking them long after everyone else has stopped. So, what does all of this mean? If you recognized yourself in these habits, it doesn't automatically mean you have a high IQ. But psychology suggests something important. The way you spend your time when nobody is watching often reveals more about your mind than anything you do in public. Most people think intelligence is about having the right answers, but some of the most intelligent people spend their lives asking better questions. They use solitude not as an escape from the world, but as a place to understand it. They reflect, observe, learn, and challenge their own assumptions long after everyone else has moved on. The truth is, the smartest minds rarely look impressive in everyday life. They are often quiet, thoughtful, curious. They spend hours thinking about things that nobody asked them to think about. They seek understanding instead of attention, growth instead of validation, and truth instead of comfort. And that is why these habits matter. Because intelligence is not always visible. Sometimes it looks like a long walk with no destination. Sometimes it looks like a notebook filled with private thoughts. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone in silence while the rest of the world is desperately trying to avoid it. The world rewards people for being busy, but wisdom often comes to those who make time to think. So the next time you find yourself alone with your thoughts, don't assume nothing important is happening. Some of the most powerful mental work takes place in complete silence. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from this video, it's this. The person you become is shaped less by what you do in front of others, and more by what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching. Because character is built in private. Wisdom is developed in private. And often, true intelligence reveals itself in private too. Thank you for watching, and remember, your relationship with your own mind may be the most important relationship you ever build.